Hi, I'm Tim Derling, and it's time for another episode of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Thanks for watching. On this episode, it's a cassette episode. Actually, all the episodes this month are going to be just a theme. And I'm going to go through the collection of one of the earliest hard rock bands I ever got into, and I've always been a fan. It's Triumph, of course, Canadian band, three-piece band. And their albums were released on different labels in different parts of the world. And there's a little bit of a confusing story between their first two albums, the first album, and we'll try to make sense of it here for you on this episode. So on my Triumph CD episode and my most recent vinyl episode I did on them, which you can easily search for, I've explained this before, but their first album was self-titled, and it only came out in Canada in 1976 on a quite a well-known Canadian label called Attic Records, which was a successful independent label for many years. And then their second album came out in 1977 called Rock and Roll Machine, also on Attic Records, also just in Canada. And then they signed a worldwide deal with RCA Records, and so their albums could get distributed in the States and elsewhere around the world. And what happened at that point is exactly what Atlantic Records did when they signed AC/DC in 1976. They compiled the first two Australian albums into what was later known as High Voltage. RCA did that for Rock and Roll Machine. So that meant for many years, until the mid-90s when Triumph started reissuing their albums, there was an album's worth of songs that were very much in limbo. And when I was younger, I didn't have access. There was no internet. I didn't have access to, used record places and things to educate myself and find, the albums that had these original songs on them. Where I'm all going with this is that I actually don't have a cassette copy of the very first Triumph album. It is one of the hardest cassettes I've ever had to try to locate. I have seen exactly one on Instagram. Someone posted a picture of another cassette, but in the background I could see that it was on their, wall along with a bunch of other tapes. And I wish back then, I don't know who it is, I wish I'd have contacted them and said, hey, would you consider selling that Triumph tape? As a matter of fact, earlier this year I made a post, so that's one of my, I don't make New Year's resolutions really. I said I resolved to find that album by the year's end, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen. However, I do have something in its place, and it's I'm kind of glad I went for it. It's a UK cassette. Let's show it to you now. It's very unique for a lot of reasons. So, first of all, oh, look at that. It's just called Triumph. Well, this is it, isn't it? Kind of. And look at that cover. It's a very blurry photo of the band on stage. That's actually the shot that RCA used for the 1978 release of Rock and Roll Machine. And you can find that in my vinyl collection. That's the version of it I do have. Now on the back, this is the Rock and Roll Machine worldwide release. It's a compilation of the songs from the first two albums. This is the closest I can come to finding an album that's just called Triumph, so I'm going to use this one. I don't know if you can tell, but this case is like nothing else I've ever seen. It's like silver or gold, plated, like just plastic, but it's got like silver or gold paint on it. It's very, very shiny and strange. And this is what the cassette itself looks like. And nothing in the J card except songwriting credits. And again, it just says Triumph. So that's going to fill the spot until I find an actual version of the first Triumph cassette. Oddly enough, the second one I've seen different places. I don't see it a lot, but I have seen it. This is the Canadian version of Rock and Roll Machine from 1977. And if you're a fan that just got into the band like I did in the 80s and never went back, this is a different cover than you're used to. It's also a different track listing. And this is a 1977 release on Attic Records. Nothing in the J card at all, and that's what the cassette looks like. So the album a lot of people know is Rock and Roll Machine, and so did I for many years, is this. This is the MCA reissue from Canada. And at one time, most of my early Triumph tapes all looked like this, the blue on it. And I like that blue, which is kind of cool. The MCA remastered, re-equalized. And from an early age, when I first bought this in '88, it says on the back, this recording is a compilation from the previously released albums Triumph and Rock and Roll Machine. And I looked at that and I said, okay. This is the first album though, right? I didn't know what do I do with that information? Again, no internet, no, I had no, it was years, it was 5 or 6 years before I started to put the pieces together. And when it comes to the first Triumph album, the funny thing is it's actually easier to find it on 8-track than it is to find it on cassette. Very odd. That's the tape itself. So that's kind of the end of where that confusion, everything else is pretty straightforward. 1979, next album, Just a Game. This is a Canadian reissue, of course, on MCA Records. This contained Hold On and Lay It on the Line. It was their first big album, and it is a gold album in the States. Eventually it was. Good album. And that's that. Now the record labels are kind of all over the place. The next album came out in 1980, Progressions of Power. This is a Canadian release on Attic Records. Tape itself, a little bit of customization. I guess the customization is on the Attic logo, sorry, not on the Triumph logo. The biggest album, the most successful Triumph album, came out in 1981. Of course, it's Allied Forces. Now this is a Canadian version on Attic, but it's a Columbia House issue. That's the blue color. If it was just a standard one, retail one, it would be white. On the back there it says where it's distributed by Columbia House, and the tape looks very similar. The next one is the only one I have as a US RCA copy, and it was the last album that they did for RCA, Never Surrender, 1983. It's actually pretty substantial for credits. First I'll show you what the tape looks like, but it actually has all the lyrics and credits inside of it, which is kind of surprising for such an early tape. So then they signed with MCA, and MCA reissued all the albums, and that's when the first two kind of fell off the face of the earth a little bit. And the soft spot I have for this next one I'm going to show you, it's one of the earliest cassettes I ever bought when I first started actually buying albums as opposed to just recording songs off the radio, Thunder 7. I just love this album. It's my favorite Triumph album, and it was a successful one for them, but it's generally not. Allied Forces is generally considered the best. I think this one's the best. This is an MCA release. Kind of hard to see with that case. This is an MCA release on, it's Canadian, and it's Columbia House. This is one of those albums I've listened to so many times, I don't even need to listen to it again. I know every note and every ad-libbed vocal and drum fill. I can air guitar this album like crazy. No, I won't demonstrate for you. Now, curiously enough, I never thought much about it at the time, but for their second MCA release, they came out with a double live album, but they've got this catalog that MCA was able to grab onto, so I guess it makes sense. 1985, Stages, contained 2 new studio tracks at the time. This is just a Canadian retail edition on MCA. And there's something funny inside this, or I think it's funny. Almost cute, if you like. So there's a picture of the band, and then there's some credits, but there's an identification card in here that you can fill out. Imagine then having that in your wallet. Did anybody do that? If you did, I'm not going to make fun of you. I've never seen anything like it, you know. Here's all his information. It also says he's a Triumph fan, so he's all good. We'll help him. 1986, next album to come out, The Sport of Kings, and this is a Canadian copy on MCA, and it is a Columbia House issue. And aside from a band photo, this has everything in it that was in the record or the CD version. And the final Triumph album to feature the classic lineup, 1987, Surveillance. This is a Canadian MCA copy. This one has a customized band logo on it, there over the Surveillance title. And lyrics and credits. So of course, 1988, Rick Emmett leaves. That's kind of it for the band, at least for a while. And they owe MCA one more thing. So of course, the inevitable Best Of comes out, and this came out in '89, Triumph Classics, and it's still a pretty good single disc introduction to this band, and it's more or less still readily available. As a matter of fact, it hasn't been too long that they reissued it on vinyl. Band's done a pretty good job reissuing their catalog. When that started, they started to put it out the way it was meant to be put out. That's a Canadian Columbia House issue. And very little in it, just the songs and the albums that they came from. There's one more cassette I'm going to show you, and I really think this is the last one. I don't know what else would have come out on cassette by then. So Rick Emmett's gone, started a solo career. They get a guy named Phil X. Of course, is better known now. He's Bon Jovi's lead guitar player. And he was in the movie Hired Gun, which I highly recommend watching. And they put out what I think was a really good album. Nobody ever talks about this album in a positive way. I don't see anything wrong with it. It's Edge of Excess. Came out in 1992, a year when there were very few melodic hard rock albums coming out. This came out, and it just sounds like Triumph. Yeah, you know, you're missing Rick's guitar and Rick's vocals. Phil's a great guitar player, and Gil Moore, the drummer, sings all the songs, and I like his voice. So this is a Canadian copy, and it's on Virgin. In the States, they signed with Victory Records, which was a Polygram distributed label, and Yes were on that label too, and the label folded. It didn't last very long. And this has got all the lyrics, credits, and photos. It's pretty extensive, actually, and this is just a good hard rock album. You know, it's missing Rick Emmett. It's missing a big, part. I wish they'd have put out a couple more with this lineup. I think they would have been all right. That's a look at my Triumph cassette collection. And thanks for watching Tim's Final Confessions.